Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, Eric Farnsworth mentioned earlier on that this lunch is also being attended by the President-elect of Guatemala. But he announced that before the President-elect of Guatemala had arrived. So I'd just like to take the opportunity once again to introduce the President of Guatemala and thank him for his attendance. So I'm John Negroponte. I'm a chairman emeritus of the Council of the Americas, America Society, and it's my pleasure this afternoon to both introduce and interview one of my successors as director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, who in her career, prior to becoming DNI, as we call it, on January 21st, 2021, I think she was the first high-ranking administration official confirmed by the Senate in the new Biden administration. Prior to assuming those duties, she had, under President Obama, been deputy head of the CIA and deputy national security advisor. And even earlier in her career, she, well, put it this way, she's not unfamiliar with this building. She had been in the legal advisor's office after a stint clerking for a judge, I think, after getting out of law school, and then she came over here to the Department of State. And I think there was a time at which you were almost made the legal advisor of the Department of State, but then they diverted you to which of the two? Was it the CIA? To the CIA. So I don't know what I would have advised her if she'd asked my advice at that time. But in any case...
I know I wanted to be legal advisor.
Did you? Okay. Anyway, welcome. And what I'd like to do, we don't have that much time, but so we've got just a few topics to cover here. But I want to start, since the principal interest of the large majority of people attending this event is the affairs of the Western Hemisphere, to maybe talk, if you can just talk to us a little bit about what the priorities and interests of the intelligence community might be in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, especially from an analytic point of view.
Yeah.
You don't have to go back over the Bay of Pigs or anything like that.
No, well,
sorry.
No, it is. It's first of all, it's a great honor to be here, and I really appreciate the opportunity to have a chance to be with you, and honestly, it's also I've had the great honor and joy of actually getting to work for at one point in my life when he was Deputy Secretary of State of as here, but also just having an opportunity to be with John, who is one of the great predecessors for my institution, the one who really set it up, and I hope that I do you proud in terms of your own legacy in our work. I am, in terms of the broad perspectives that we take from the intelligence community on the Western Hemisphere, I think maybe I'd start with the fact that when I first went to the CIA, I remember, and this may resonate with all of you, that President Obama at the time said to me, the one thing I really want you to do is think about how we can change the president's daily brief so that I see more articles on the Western Hemisphere and on Asia. He said, I see so much on the Middle East, on counterterrorism, on sort of these key issues that are getting focused on every day, and I really want to think about the broader strategic issues and to me, these are the two regions that I need to make sure that I'm focused on in that context. And I thought, well, gosh, how hard could that be, right? Mm-hmm. You go to the CIA, where we do a lot of the writing for the PDB, even as it's run out of the Director of National Intelligence Office. But a phenomenal amount of the articles are produced by the CIA, and so the question is why, it seems like it should be really easy to start producing more articles on the Western Hemisphere and China. And one of the things that I found was that, even with an acceptance of the prioritization for us from a foreign policy and national security perspective, the fact is that the urgent crises, right, first of all, tend to drive our work. We are far more focused on the immediate threat, the issue that we're dealing with today and so on. Makes it very challenging for us to back people up and say, okay, but now let's talk about the strategic issues that need to be dealt with. And furthermore, when it comes to our own National Security Council system, and I don't know if this will make sense to you, John, you tell me if you agree with this, but one of the things that happens is we have meetings, right? Many of the meetings are focused on what we need to deal with today, right? In other words, there is a crisis, we're gonna have to pull together, we're gonna have to take action on X, Y, and Z. Those are meetings that tend to be meetings that we write for, so we write analytic product for those meetings. And as a consequence, what happens is those products are generally sort of the best formed when they get nominated to be as part of the president's daily brief, right? If you're writing constantly on certain issues, you're testing it, you're working it through the interagency, you sort of have a sense of these are in right place. And then third, I think in every job I've had in government, it has been hard to focus on what's really important, and that gets crowded out by the sort of urgent, crises and the inbox, in a sense, in your day. And one of the issues for us, and one of the things that we've really tried to make an effort on, is to have basically these larger strategic pieces that help us to frame what are the critical issues that policymakers need to be focused on, that help us to set up a context for making decisions on the day-to-day issues that are coming up that might otherwise suffer from being seen through a particular, sort of stovepipe lens, essentially, and not understanding the implications across the board. And so we've done national intelligence estimates, others on the Western Hemisphere. We have looked at the political, the economic, the military trends that we're seeing. We think about migration, obviously, an enormous amount, given the impact and the importance from a national security perspective. We look at a whole series of challenges that we know are being faced, but at the end of the day, I think so much of it is thinking about how can we work with our partners to both face what are mutual challenges, but also take advantage of opportunities when we're working together to address whatever the issues are. But also, how can we ensure that we're helping each other to build, in effect, more stable, healthy democracies? How are we able to sort of promote the kind of governance that we know is ultimately going to help to address some of the broader challenges that we're facing at the end of the day because those issues haven't been dealt with? And that is a huge piece of the work that we do. And I know, we have a president who is extremely focused on the Western Hemisphere, who spent a lot of time. I saw him as vice president during the Obama years, focused on the Western Hemisphere and thinking about how is it that we can do more and invest more in these areas. And so we also get the demand signal from the top that helps us to try to bring that up. But many of the things on your list will be the other crises that we're dealing with, I think.
Well, and it's for a country that has global reach and global responsibilities for a whole variety of reasons, it's not that easy to discern your priorities, given the multiple things that are going on. So speaking of which, I was wondering if maybe we could, in the time that remains, go into some of the issues that confront us today in today's world, perhaps starting with Israel and Gaza, and then maybe we can talk about some of the others. But
absolutely. Yeah, as you might imagine, I'm spending a lot of time on Israel and Gaza.
Yeah,
but
so
tell me.
Would you
want a sort of overview?
Would you give us an overview? I mean, whatever
Sure.
it is you're comfortable talking to us about.
Yeah. I mean, I'll state the obvious first, and then maybe what I'll try to do is give you a sense of what we're doing in the intelligence community to try to help policymakers during this time. You know, as a preliminary matter, obviously we've seen since October 7th, thousands have been killed. It is hundreds of thousands displaced. We see, you know, over 200 hostages having been taken and potentially in Gaza. It is, it's a absolutely horrific attack that Hamas engaged in against Israel, and it is also horrific to watch essentially the region, you know, in flames in this scenario, and what's happening in Gaza right now. And we spend a fair amount of time on kind of the following issues. One is trying to understand what's happening on the ground as we try to help policymakers essentially evaluate how it is that we can contain the conflict. And, you know, we are looking at Hezbollah to the north of Israel and Lebanon, and we are watching how they are, you know, sort of their campaign of attacks across the border, Israel's reactions, how it is that that is proceeding, whether or not we see escalation, trying to interpret their intent in many circumstances so that policymakers can try to make decisions about what's occurring there, and talking consistently with our Israeli colleagues on what's happening so that they can understand it too, and trying to provide some in a way, you know, you can feel as you talk to your Israeli colleagues this sense of, you know, as they have to get off the phone to go into a bunker, or, you know, dealing the sort of just anxiety, the stress, the concern for their population. And they're looking to us in many circumstances to try to make sure that they're seeing things properly, that they're evaluating things the way a good intelligence service should, so that they can help their policymakers.
So just to interrupt on that
please.
one,
yeah.
wouldn't, I mean, you say Hezbollah and what their intentions are, but isn't that going to be pretty much dictated from Tehran?
In part, yeah, but it's, I mean, it is, we are also watching Iran and how it is that they're effectively looking at the situation. And there's no question that when the supreme leader tells Nasrallah, this is what I want, right, that that is exactly. But it is not as if they are the same. And there's, you know, there is a kind of an independent discussion that occurs for Lebanese Hezbollah under Nasrallah. And then in Iran, we're watching sort of layers of escalation, effectively, that they can engage in, including escalation against our own forces in the region, and we've seen that. We've seen series of attacks, and you'll see from the Department of Defense spokespeople talking about those attacks in Iraq and Syria against our own forces during this period. We're also watching the Houthis, and they've engaged in a number of attacks in the last few weeks, and trying to understand what's happening there. They've been effectively unsuccessful, but nevertheless have been ranging quite considerably, and creates another potential front. We're also watching what's happening in the West Bank, trying to understand the potential for escalation there as a consequence of series of, you know, different vectors and potential escalatory violence. And of course, we are watching in the Gaza Strip and ultimately producing reports, including, you know, not just on the battlefield, but on the humanitarian situation and the challenges that the Palestinian population are facing right now, and it is horrific for all.
So when I was in your position, I would say probably among the most, I mean, it wasn't the most because we also had the Five Eyes, but among the most important collaborative relationships we had was with Israeli intelligence, both the Mossad and the Israeli defense intelligence, as well as Shin Bet. And I guess I'll ask the journalistic question, were they surprised? I mean, it seems like, and I don't know what you make of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we were all of us, both of us, in effect, surprised by the scale and the scope of the Hamas attack. You know, I would defer to them on, you know, the puts and takes of why and what that means. And I think for us, it's, you know, it intensifies our interest in ensuring that we can be as vigilant in effectively monitoring the situation because, as you know from the many crises you've been through, I find that one of the great values for the intelligence community is being able to help policymakers during a crisis understand what's actually happening and avoid, hopefully, then unintended escalation or mistaken escalation or other things that, do not result in what you were intending them to result, and also to make sure that what you are doing is actually being understood by others, including adversaries, for what it is intended to be. And that's a big piece of what we're spending time on.
Can we go in this little Dory zone here to another conflict that's been bedeviling us for the last couple of years, the Ukraine, and just what you'd like to share with us on that topic.
I know, right? In 5
I
minutes
see
or
Madame
less.
Georgieva, our European friend, shaking her head. Yeah.
You will have to help me then if we let us go through this. I mean, we see a sort of strategic stalemate for the most part on the battlefield right now in terms of the front lines. It is, that doesn't mean that there's no fighting. There continues to be fighting. The Russians are continuing to attempt a kind of an offensive in the east, and they're not making much progress. The Ukrainians are also, pushing and trying to defend around Bakhmut, and we see in the south it is largely stabilizing, and there is some activity in the Kherson region. And yet at the same time, we also see Russia effectively engaging in kind of asymmetric attacks, ultimately preparing for potentially, further rounds against the energy infrastructure for Ukraine, which will be devastating for them, and something that we're obviously working with the Ukrainians to help them try to promote resilience, and the State Department is really leading that work, and with the Department of Defense. And it is, a question of trying to obviously help the Ukrainians in their own efforts to counter the Russian aggression, but also to try to manage the economic issues associated with a conflict like this, and thinking through how it is that we can work with partners and allies to promote that.
And a little footnote here, which I want to add, which is I think that you've done an extraordinary job in being helpful to Ukraine throughout this whole situation, of course, starting with the fact that the Russian attack was not a surprise. And that is in at least some, if not large measure, due to information that we provided to the Ukrainians.
I'm so proud of our analysts, honestly, on this issue. I mean, I think the community really came together and they pulled that picture, and we were able to share it with partners and allies. And I think it did help to set the stage for the policy conversation that ultimately engaged allies who were initially quite skeptical about whether or not Russia would actually consider this. And that has been one of the things that, it has taught us, and through that process, kind of how we can continue to do that, to try to set up for leader conversations on different issues with intelligence that provides, in a sense, a common factual, basis for then policymakers actually engaging, including leaders, on what are the issues, how do we respond to this if we agree that this is a threat or a challenge. So I have seen that. The other thing I've seen is the extraordinary way in which really Ukraine has used its own intelligence, and including, things that we've helped them to understand in order to defend themselves. And I find it's, the two conversations that I have now all the time that are a little different before before Russia invaded Ukraine, is one on intelligence diplomacy, on the degree to which we're being asked in so many different areas to see, can we write more? Can we do things that we can share with partners to really set up for that conversation? And on that, I would say, I think there's a real opportunity, but for us, we also need to think about doing it in a way that protects sources and methods, that also doesn't put us in a position of being seen as just a tool of policy, because we constantly want to make sure that people understand that in the intelligence community, we're going to be providing our analysis it is not something that we're asking policy about before we provide. And so, for example, when we went to NATO, Tony and I had a conversation, and we said, no, I'd like to do that separately without having the Secretary of State right next to me, so that it's clear I'm providing the intelligence community's analysis, and then you will have to talk to the Secretary of State or our ambassador to the NATO to have a conversation about policy. So there's some risk there. But the other conversation is, I had the Commandant of the Marines say to me that one of the most interesting changes for him is that when he goes to talk to partners, one of the first things they want to talk about is intelligence sharing now, because they've seen the value of that.
Yeah, well, I always reacted in a somewhat mixed way to that, and I can remember State Department, sometimes they'd be writing papers about how we can improve relations with country X, and they'd put in, one of the bullet points was increased intelligence sharing, and
Exactly.
I think they just sort of threw it in there, and as a professional, I understood the implications of what that statement was, and how it's just not that you don't just automatically set up intelligence sharing.
Yeah.
And there's quite a bit of complexity
Yeah.
that goes with it. And so I kind of resented sometimes intelligence being treated as a deliverable for a bilateral meeting between two presidents, for example, or, two heads
Yeah.
of state,
Yeah.
heads of government. So anyway, you don't have to comment on that,
No,
but it caused me problems at
I'm
times.
totally with you. And it's funny because I see that through, like, there's intelligence sharing where you're very specifically sharing analysis, for example, with another intelligence service, so that that intelligence service
Yeah.
can see what you're seeing of a threat picture, and that can inform a better conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's another thing to just set up intelligence sharing as a deliverable without
Yeah.
a particular connection to some result that you're,
Yeah, and the other thing is that, you definitely don't have to comment on this, but I'll say it. In my experience, both analysts and operations officers much prefer to share intelligence on a bilateral rather than a multilateral basis, just in terms of how you are able to control whatever it is you share.
yeah.
And last point, I remember one time, I won't name the country, but where we gave them a very sensitive piece of information about an imminent rocket launch, I think it was, by North Korea. And, the next morning it appeared in the local newspaper. And, that was not the intent of sharing that particular
Yeah.
information.
That is-
Maybe, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that is definitely an issue. And I think, but one thing that we've been working on, I'd be interested in if you think about this in the same way, like, so much of what we do is to help promote better decision-making in government,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, it's just, that is so much, we call sometimes sharing for decision advantage. It's kind of one of our phrases, which you may end up hating over time, but it gets the point across. And one of the things that we've been trying to promote is for multilateral organizations like NATO, for example, and really one of my predecessors, Clapper, spent a lot of time on this, is promoting the intelligence arm of NATO so that it can serve as a better sort of,
That's
within
fine.
the organization,
Sure.
right? And I think that's something that's really worthwhile
Yeah,
in a sense.
I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more, yeah. Can we move to
Yes.
U.S.-China, and it's sort of timely and topical in the sense that, we got the APEC meeting coming up in San
Yeah,
Francisco
exactly.
next week, is it? And President Xi and President Biden will most likely meet. So, yeah, how are you thinking and seeing China these days? I
in
can
4
tell you,
minutes, I know.
yeah, in 4 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
I went to China with Henry Kissinger in 1972. I can say I was part of those gullible, naive people who extended the hand of friendship out to China. At least that's what Mr. Pompeo would have you believe. But so how are you feeling about China today?
It's really hard to imagine how to say something useful in this time.
Well,
I
okay,
will
quick
say-
question
please
then.
Tell me.
This
Yeah.
way, is this campaign, this friendship campaign that's going on right now by the Chinese, is that something fundamental or is it tactical? Or I mean, how do you see their attitude towards us at the moment?
Yeah, it's a great question because honestly, I think that's one of the values that we really bring is to try to be the voice in the room that says this is how China is perceiving us. And to your point, we would assess, China and Chinese leadership continues to think that the United States, even though we obviously disagree with this, but continues to think that the United States is trying to contain them, is trying to suppress them. And President Xi has come out more publicly in reflecting that in, statements and so on that he's made. This is part of their thinking on this. And they continue to be quite aggressive, obviously, with us in a whole series of areas that we watch across the board where we're trying to effectively counter. I think the thing that we have always been, at least from an administration perspective, doing is trying at the same time that we counter that aggression is to ensure that the channels of communication are open with China. And the reality is, generally, it has been hard for China to do that. That is, historically, we see China freeze up in a crisis. When something happens with China, they are not capable of sort of reaching out. We do not have the same kinds of emergency channel communications that we've had with, for example, Russia during the Cold War, other things like that. And we've promoted having that, and we are seeing them be more receptive to that now. And I don't think that means that they've changed their view about how it is that they perceive the United States in this respect, but they are interested both in talking to us and we think, in a sense, in a more stable relationship. And part of that is in the context of their own concerns about their own economy and recognizing that in promoting stability, they effectively have the opportunity to attract more foreign investment and other things that they know are important to them in the sort of near-term economic situation. But it is, but I think it is a continuing challenge to create the kind of opportunities for continuing to counter unacceptable aggression or sort of undermining of the international system and the rules-based order that we've really helped to promote into, that we believe in, and at the same time create opportunities for some cooperation and collaboration on issues where we know we have mutual issues, right, such as climate, such as counterfentanyl, such as other things that are of critical importance to us. And I think that's something that obviously we'll continue to need to be diligent on. But it is. I will leave it at that since I am now over time.
Yeah, we've run out of time, but I would just say, I was in China a couple of weeks ago as part of a Track 2 discussion, and you can see they've ramped that kind of thing up again. Yeah. And the foreign minister came over here, and now the presidents are going to meet. So whatever we do, I think it would be useful and important that we keep up this dialogue and not go incommunicado with each other. I think that's the most dangerous thing.
I totally agree. And I think we've been consistent in trying to promote that potential. And it's been harder for us to get them to engage, but I think they are starting to, which is good.
Well, your plate is full. I know that. So we're going to honor the time constraints here. And thank you so much for appearing before us. And please express our thanks.
Please. Thank you so much. Thank you.